ADHD is a memory disorder. It doesn't mean that you're flawed. It doesn't mean that something's wrong. It just means that there's like some explanations. There's some explanations available and they can help.
Living with a neurodivergent brain can be demoralizing, especially when comparing yourself to others. That's why I am so excited to introduce you to one of my favorite storytellers, someone who has spent over a decade figuring out how to thrive with his ADHD brain. Meet Landon Bryant.
I am Landon Bryant of Landon Talks all across the internet, where I talk entirely too much about a place that I love, the South, and all the intricacies that have to do with that.
Before finding success and personal momentum, Landon struggled to gain traction in life.
And I really, literally, and metaphorically failed at everything that I could.
It wasn't until an adult diagnosis of ADHD and years of perfecting the right medications, systems, and collaborative relationships that he began to find a path forward. So join Landon and me as we unpack how he has learned to embrace the creative potential of ADHD while also implementing strategies to smooth out his challenges. You are listening to Mental Note Podcast. I'm Ellie Pike. I would actually love for you to tell us a story because you are known as a storyteller. I know you mentioned something about a Walmart high school to me, but I have not heard the story. So if you're open to it, let's start there.
So listen, I grew up in a small town, and in the small town, we had a Walmart. And on spring break, when I was in 8th grade, our school got blown away by a tornado. No one was hurt. So the town had to just do something with us, right? You can't just like let an entire 7th through 12th grade school not go to the last 9 weeks of school. So they decided to put us in the old Walmart building, literally the old Walmart building. And this was freshly emptied. So all of the signs were there. The only thing that was gone were the shelves. Like everything but the shelves was there. And so I spent 8th grade in the baby section of Walmart, which was quite traumatizing. And we were still upset about it. 8th graders are exactly the grade to not put in the baby section. Like we weren't mature enough to handle being in the baby section. It was very offensive.
It's very demoralizing.
Our principals wore Walmart vests. Our bell was an air horn. The intercom was the Walmart intercom. And we had the cafeteria in the garden center, and that's all the honest to God truth. So there are some people who graduated from Walmart High School for real. I didn't graduate from Walmart High School, but I did spend the last part of middle school there, and that really did happen.
That is so comical, and I can just only imagine seeing my principal walk through with that vest on and graduating from Walmart High School. It's amazing. I don't even know how to transition into my real question because we do talk about mental health on this episode. But I'm wondering how growing up in the rural South, did your culture influence your perception of mental health and like mental health care in that regard as well?
So we live in a really strange transitional time period in human history, I feel like, where we went from local to like this global society. And when it was a local society, I'm from like the best kind of people, like they're the best people. But as far as mental health goes, it's a very religious area, so it's more of a pray about it kind of an attitude and take it to the Lord, that kind of situation. So that is the approach that was taken with mental health. And honestly, when I was growing up, if you were to say you had something going on with your mental health, it would be a lot more extreme than what we consider that today. Like it was just such a different world in that people weren't used to that kind of a thing. There was definitely mental illness around me, but not talked about, and not you wouldn't talk about the treatment. So it wasn't really a thing. So my dad was a banker, my mom was a teacher, and we had dinner every night, and everything was scheduled out, and like there was homework time, and there was like do this time, there was go to bed time. So it was very structured. So while I did drive my mother nuts and like I lost every pair of glasses, every retainer, every piece of homework. We spent so many times like searching for stuff or trying to find things. It didn't present itself as an academic problem like any issues that I have. They didn't present themselves as an academic problem, but that's not necessarily what ADHD is. So I just slipped through mostly. And then in high school I had really excellent teachers, but again, I was set up to where it was almost impossible to not be successful because my schedule was so guided and so specific and everything was at a certain time. I was a swimmer, so I got exercise in. I don't know, it was just a whole thing. I really hated swimming, and when I look back on it, it was because of I was so bored. I mean, I was just so bored, like going back and forth in a pool all the time. Like it really was kind of torturous. But I gained some skills through all that. But then it was when I got in college that I really realized that something was up, or when I started to suspect something was up.
Like with your own mental health?
Yes, with my own mental health, but I just didn't really have anything to base it off of because I'd never been exposed to anything. Unfortunately, the public school system, the way it treated learning disorders and learning situations, it was very separate at the time period. Like they just separated out anyone with any sort of issue, and they like were in a whole different building really throughout the day even. So just not a lot of exposure to what accommodations would look like, not a lot of exposure to what even ADHD is or what any type of learning disorder would be. Also, as a very successful like academic person, it just wasn't on my radar. Not at all on my radar. I knew that I was not like my sister because she was just very like perfect in all sense of like she did everything correctly. She was not like struggling to make it to school. She was not like losing anything. I don't know. I knew there was differences. Like I could tell there's differences, but I just chalked it up to sort of personal failures, honestly.
What did that feel like just internally if you're like, okay, so I'm losing things, I know something's different? Was it a feeling of kind of like, what ball am I going to drop today? Kind of like, how am I going to fail today?
All the time. That's a great way to put it. What ball am I going to drop today? That's how I always felt. Always felt that way. Even as a kid, I don't remember not feeling that way. Almost like kind of on high alert all the time because I expect to do something wrong or like to forget something or to leave something off. And that has defined a lot of my life. Like I'm a very anxious person. I'm working on that as I go along. But it's definitely from that. It's definitely from like not believing that what I've done is enough. So it really showed up in college. In college, you have a lot more freedom, and I had a lot more freedom. I was not in my parents' house. I was on my own, and I dropped the ball entirely. I had no idea how to set up systems to work for myself. I had no idea how to take notes. I had no idea how to study. I'd never had to study before. I just like did the homework, So it was an entire new world. And I really, literally, and metaphorically failed at everything that I could. So after that first semester of college, it was very shocking for me to go from all A's, top of my class, to literally failing a semester of college. That was quite the shock. So I bounced around from program to program and from school to school even, just looking for what fit before I started addressing like what was wrong in the scenario. I went to architecture school. I went to nursing school. I bounced around. And finally, I just started working in the hospital after nursing school didn't work out. I just became a technician, an ER tech, and worked in the ER, which really suited ADHD because I am constantly in emergency mode. Like I'm always in red alert emergency mode. So the emergency room was exactly the environment for me to like really focus that. If you are ever in a situation that is urgent, you need somebody with ADHD there because it's been an emergency my whole life. This is nothing new. I'm ready to go. So that suited me for a while. And then I decided it was time to move forward in life because I got married and was going to have a kid. And I knew I needed to move forward, and you can't really move forward in a hospital without licensing. So I knew I needed to go back to school, but I didn't know what that was. So I went to the University of Southern Mississippi, where my wife had graduated, and it's the closest college to me. And they kind of looked at what was going on, and they were like, hey, you need some help here. This isn't a regular thing for somebody with your kind of grades and academic history to have suddenly dropped off like this. Like there's something going on here. So I got screened and lit that screener right up. And Southern did a great job of really walking me through what it means to have ADHD and what it means to have accommodations. And it was a challenge because I still believed it was personal failure at that point. I still was like, okay, y'all are calling it that, but I know that I'm just lazy. I know that I just can't keep up with stuff. I know that if I thought about it harder, or if I worked harder, or if I paid attention more, this wouldn't be the case. That was always in the back of my mind. But Southern got me through. They really did, and they were really so great about it. They even did things like like you have to take these letters to your teachers and get that, like, lets the teachers know what the accommodations were. And they were like, I don't feel like you're going to take these letters. And I was like, I probably am not going to take these letters. So they would even go and like do that and meet with the teacher. They saw the needs I had and helped me set up a system of like, be at the library at this time to study, write this paper now, take a little bit of extra time on your test so you're not freaking out about it and can really focus. Just a lot of the accommodations that I needed, and I got through Southern. I think the data is there because I successfully graduated from the University of Southern Mississippi. And ever since then, it's been a journey to really understand myself and understand what all that was, and understand that it wasn't a personal failure, that it was an actual need. And so here I am now talking to you about this, and it is really wild to me to be at this point because it's taken so long for me to even get to a point to where I even understand my own situation, much less be able to talk about it like this.
Well, it really sticks out to me that it was hard for you to even believe that you had this diagnosis of ADHD. But do you ever still have moments like that where it's hard to believe that that's actually a diagnosis and that it's not a personal failure?
Well, I do, because it's just like when you reflect on like your actions, or you reflect on a moment when maybe something could have gone better or you could have done something better, there's always this like, well, if I had just done this or if I had just done that, and that feels personal. It doesn't feel like a thing that is different about the way my brain works. It feels like something that I did. So it's a constant reminder of that. But on the flip side of that, I've seen what the anxiety from that does to somebody. So I'm really trying to believe it. I'm really trying to like let my body believe that. And I'm trying to like actually personally believe it. And instead of focusing on the failures, focus on the things that it's made me be able to do really well. So it's a constant relationship with it. I don't know if I'll ever fully like grasp it, and I don't know if it comes from growing up in rural Mississippi, or if there's other people that have ADHD that think that way. I think it comes back to a time period. It just wasn't at the forefront of the 90s. It wasn't the forefront of the 2000s. That wasn't what people were talking about. ADHD was the kid who couldn't sit still, and the kid who couldn't stay there. And I can hyper focus for hours on something, and I can stay as still as I need to, but I might not remember to have on shorts or to tie my shoe. You know, like there's little things that it's not just being a busybody and being all over the place. And so it's still just really difficult to reconcile those things. I don't know if it ever will be completely reconciled, but it's something I work on.
I really appreciate you talking about that, because that's exactly what was happening in my mind. Was I remember being in school and the only impression I had of ADHD was like the pin clicker and the person who couldn't stop like moving around and needed like more discipline, honestly, quote unquote, from the teachers. And that's not what it is. And so I appreciate that it's been a journey for you to like recalibrate the definition of ADHD in the first place, much less the fact that you actually have it.
No, I agree with you. Like recalibrating that definition, and I'm believing it. It's a whole thing. It just was it like you said. It was more of a behavior thing when we were growing up. It was about behavior. It was like the kids who couldn't behave. It didn't have to do with executive functioning.
So, how has medication played a role in having this diagnosis?
It definitely has, and anybody who's been on this journey knows that the medication side of things is very frustrating. It is very difficult. I don't know anybody who's found the right medicine immediately. It's something that you definitely have to work with your medical providers with, and that's a whole thing, is finding the right provider, finding the right behavioral health specialist that can guide you through that path and is willing to work with you. One thing about ADHD is that it just is so adjacent to drug seeking, and because think about like from a provider's perspective. So you made an appointment because you are trying to figure that out, and then you missed the appointment. Then you call panicked because you are out of your medicine. It's just a whole thing. Like it's just a whole dance to dance on, like not looking like you are drug seeking while also like finding the right help. But besides that aspect of it, just finding the right pharmaceutical at the beginning is really difficult because they're all so different. They work in different ways. Some work with norepinephrine, some work with more dopamine, some work, I mean, there's so many ways to approach the whole thing. And I feel like I've been on all of them and worked through all of them. There's been so many times when I was on like the wrong one, like the first one I got on, I was still working in the emergency room. And I just remember being in the stock room, like organizing that stockroom so intensely, and one of the nurses like finding me and being like, whoa. And I was like, yes, whoa, what is this? Need to drink a lot of water and calm down, because they can be too much, and it just depends on what you need, like short acting or long acting, what it acts on. So there's not really any advice you could give generically to people about medication, besides it's going to be a process, and the first one that you get may not be the one that works for you the most. I hear all these stories of people that immediately take their medicine and they're like, wow, this is what people are supposed to feel like. And it never was that for me. It kind of just moves me to a base level in a way. Like I definitely am not like running around on the medicines. Like a lot of people, it really hypes them up. I could go to sleep. It's like I could focus enough to go to sleep. But anyways, it's just a process of figuring out what works for you. I finally have gotten to a spot where I feel like I know what works for me, but then now we've moved into, I'm like 36. I'm getting older. Is this like the benefits of long-term use of the medicine versus like the damage it can cause in some ways, weighing that with doctors and with specialists, it's just a lot. I don't think that there is a like one size fits all solution to the medication side of ADHD. So basically, good luck to everybody.
Well, I really appreciate that you could add a little humor to that, but that really painted a picture of the journey, right? Where you have to find the right provider first, someone you trust. And then as you're also trying to adapt to having ADHD and build the structure that you need, naturally you're going to forget things
Right.
because that's what ADHD does, right? You get caught in the moment or focused on what you're currently doing and probably forget about an appointment every now and again. And then trying the medication and being consistent with it or needing to switch them left and right. And there's benefits to them, but I'm sure there's also some downsides to taking a medication, right?
There's definitely.
So I'm curious if you could paint the picture of like, and this is your story, right? This is not going to be for anyone or everyone who takes medication for ADHD. But what does your brain feel like on a day when you take your meds versus a day that you don't?
Well, that's so interesting. I try to be very consistent with taking them, but every now and then you do need to take a break and take like a weekend off. Just for me, it's honestly really scary to not take the medicine because I don't trust myself at all with like driving. I don't trust myself to like do the things I'm supposed to. And again, this comes from like years of dealing with this. So it's also something to work out in therapeutic situations, but it's just so different for me on the medicine. I can focus on what I'm doing. And I take short acting dextroamphetamine. I think it's like Adderall, basically. Like I take a short acting one. So I can take 2 a day or 3 a day. So it's like this roller coaster ride that I get on. And at first I'm just at level 0 before I take it. And then buckle up, here we go. And there's about 4 hours of like really intense focus and I can do what I'm supposed to be doing. And then it wears off and it's like, there's not a thought in my head, not a single thought. And then I take it again and go on the roller coaster ride again. And I mean, roller coasters are fun, but if you get on roller coasters twice a day, every day, it can get exhausting. So it's like this cyclical thing. There's long lasting ones that can last all day. That didn't work for me. It was too intense, and then I got too used to it very quickly. So it just like was like doing absolutely nothing. So the short acting is what works for me. So every day I feel like I'm on that journey of not taking it. Like I go through phases throughout the day of it. And it almost like I can tell immediately like when it wears off because there went all the thoughts that I had. But if I don't take it for like a weekend or for like if I take a few days off from it, I just basically everything kind of falls apart as far as the systems that I've built to help me through life. Like laundry is a disaster when you're not on your medicine. Just like the daily activities of living, the things that you have to do every day to maintain a lifestyle, that falls away for me. So it's worth it for me to take the medicine and go on the roller coaster every day, even when I don't want to. So back to medicine though, the process of obtaining and maintaining and having the medicine is one of the hardest things about having ADHD. And it can be really demoralizing. It makes you feel like a drug seeker. It makes you feel like you're doing something wrong a lot of times. ADHD medicine is controlled. It's a controlled substance. So when you get it filled, you have to get it filled exactly 30 days from when you got your last 30-day supply. So there's no day You never have extra medicine. It's only the medicine that you need specifically for those days. Well, I mean, we're people with ADHD, so getting there on time, on the right day, making sure we called it in can be very stressful. And then you'll get to the pharmacy and they're like, we're out for 4 days. And then that's very stressful. And then they're like, you've got to call your doctor and get this prior authorization. And then now you're back and forth with your doctor, back and forth with the pharmacy. Maybe they're like, we don't have it, but you can go over here and get it, but you can't go over there and get it. Your one prescription only works at the one place. So you have to go back to your doctor, get another prescription, take it over there. It's just a mess. I definitely think it's like very inconsiderate of people who have ADHD, but I also understand like why we have controlled substances. And I do think that the medicines should be controlled. Like they're definitely not for everybody by any means, but our society at large and the medical industry has a lot of work to do as far as that goes.
Sounds like there's not much wiggle room. And even planning for vacation, like if you have to get your prescription filled while you're on vacation, but it's a class A or class B, something like that, where it's highly controlled, and your pharmacy can't just transfer it to another pharmacy. So I can empathize with that process and that it's super challenging because you have to think ahead. You have to have systems in place in order to be able to access your medication, right? And also the providers in place and the insurance. There's so many levels and hoops to jump through in order to get the medication and medical care that you need. It's so tough.
And like the medicine is what would make me do those things. So when you don't have the medicine and you're like trying to get it and you're having to jump through all those hoops, it's really a challenge. And I know that probably sounds so lazy to people without ADHD because it's like, just go do it, right? But it just doesn't work that way. It's like, that's not how an ADHD brain works. It's just not. I wish it was.
If life was that easy where you could just go do something or just change your mind, just do this instead, like none of us would have a mental health issue, you know?
Just fix it. It's fine.
So I do want to ask you, so besides medication, are there systems that you put into place that help you with day-to-day life?
There are. My whole situation is one giant accommodation. I feel like I learned to accommodate myself from my university. And my wife, her career for the past like 14 years was teaching special education. So her job was really to accommodate and help accommodate a lot of high performing students that did have some learning disorders. So I live with someone who is an expert in that field, fortunately. So our whole life is kind of set up to where we either are okay with the side effects of the things that we live with, or she's got systems in place to help me deal with it. And then when I blew up on the internet, I knew I needed a team because just the communication alone was enough. And one thing that it does to me is when I get overwhelmed is I just will like shut down entirely. I needed somebody to just help me with my day to day and like help me know what to do every day. Like whatever this job is that I have now is so random and it's so all over the place and it's not the same every day. It's like a podcast here. It's like an interview there. It's a brand trip there. And I was like unable to keep up with it. It was so stressful. And I understand that I'm in like one of the best places to be with social media and I'm so grateful for that. So I knew I needed to be like enjoying it. So I knew I needed some help. So I hired our friend, her name is Terry, and she is just a business-minded lady. Every day I get on my iPhone, she updates my to-do list, and so I just do that, whatever that is. So instead of having to like plan out the week ahead of time, she plans out the week ahead of time, and I just look at what I'm supposed to do on Monday, and then I cross that off the list. And that is the best money I've ever spent. I've gotten so much more done because of that. It's like there was all this floating around all around me, floating around, and just had no sense to it. And this helps it be less chaotic. So I feel like I'm able to be more creative and to create more. So I make way more videos in a day than I would if I had to do all the rest of the stuff and had to keep up with it. There's this sense of like dread and this sense of like, what are you forgetting, that really takes away from me. So the biggest accommodation that I have is Terry, but my wife kind of guides all of it. She's like kind of led me to see what I need and what needs to be done and to make that happen. So I am just very blessed with a lot of women. Honestly, there's like a lot of women that make this happen.
I really appreciate you saying that all of those things are hard for you, right? Like, because that in itself is hard to, I think, admit for a lot of folks. And it sounds like it creates this feeling of, I like what you said, when things were just kind of floating around you. So you're probably wondering, like, where do I even start? Which one do I grab?
Which one do I grab? Exactly.
How do I pin it down? And, I follow some folks who do different types of things for ADHD. And one of them is even a dietitian that specifically works with people with ADHD. And she talks about how hard meal prep or planning for meals is because it's so many multiple steps.
So hard.
And so my husband, who has ADHD, said recently he found a website where you can pay $12 for a whole month or something like that. And you can generate a meal plan where it also comes up with your list of groceries alongside of your meal plan. And I don't personally love that because I like the creative aspect of me diving into like, what do I want to cook? I also like to improv. So I don't know if I love that like system for myself, but I've really had to like pause a couple times this week and say like, oh, I could actually benefit from this. But most certainly, I think that he would feel like he can contribute more to our meals because some of the planning and prep is done. So then he can just come in and do the creation of it. And that likens to your story quite a bit and you being able to do the creation and the part that you're really good at.
Precisely. And meal planning is a difficult thing for people with ADHD. Like we struggle in our house with that kind of a thing. And it's like, I can't believe it's every day. Like every day I have to have to do this like at least 3 times a day. Like what in the world is so much to decide? And there's so many decisions that go into it and you get that decision fatigue to where that even making dinner is a difficult decision to make. So it's real. The meal fatigue is really for real.
I really appreciate what you're saying about decision fatigue. That seems really pertinent. I appreciate that.
And when I was a teacher, it was really intense because I had been like decisions all day long from 4-year-olds to 6th graders. And then you come home and you like also have to decide what to eat. And it was just too much. Like that would be enough to just send me right over the edge. Like, okay, that's it. I lost it. We also have to eat food at the end of that long day. I cannot deal with it. It really can be overwhelming and overwhelming and frustration. And the emotions that come with that are part of ADHD. And it's something that you have to be aware of. And it's something that I'm constantly working to catch in the middle of, like when I'm feeling that frustration or when I'm getting worked up like that. I'm not ever going to say I'm good at catching it, but I'm trying to learn to be better at being aware of those moments so that you don't lash out at the people that you love and that you don't say things that you would regret or that you don't have an emotional outburst over literally dinner, like the smallest of things. That's the side that is really gross about ADHD is the emotional dysregulation part of it.
Well, and adding to the pieces of ADHD characteristics, I know for a lot of folks, the challenging pieces are anything that could be labeled like quote unquote mundane. And where like novelty seeking is a big part of ADHD characteristics. Is that something that you can relate to too?
Very much so. So I just got back from like a really intense trip. Like I worked all day, every day. And so then you get home and now it's back to making videos every day. And it's almost like yesterday I really struggled getting going because it's like, well, I just did a lot harder, more intense, more exciting things. I don't want to do this part anymore. That's like a real feeling that you get all the time and you have to work through it. But the novelty of things definitely has a lot to do with how into it you are. And once the novelty is worn off, it's really difficult.
You alluded earlier to having specific strengths because of being neurodiverse. Would you elaborate on that? Of what are those strengths?
Obviously, like I'm very interested in a lot of different things, and I think that is a strength very much. Like the array of things that I'm interested in and the array of things I've done because of ADHD and interest in looking for something interesting and interest seeking has really defined who I am. I've done so many different things from like working in science labs to the emergency room to like waiting tables, and all of it has built me into who I am today and to what I do today. And I think it's kind of a superpower to be interested in all those things, but also the superpower of hyperfocus if I am able to spend a whole day writing because that's what I was into. It's almost like learning to wrangle that and use it for good is the trick to ADHD. It's like using the ADHD for good and finding the thing that it helps you do and then doing that.
I absolutely love hearing you say those positive things because I know that there are so many challenges that come with ADHD, but the positives are so unique. Like, I wish I had an ounce of that kind of like focus on new interests and energy to like follow this like train of thought for a long time. But instead, I'm like multitasking all the time, which I know is a skill that a lot of people with ADHD kind of wish they had. And so
Yeah.
it's like pros and cons to all of it, right? And so I really appreciate that you're able to see some of that. And I imagine that you haven't always been able to, right? And especially when you were undiagnosed as a kiddo. And so one of my questions for you is like, what do you wish you knew about ADHD or mental health when you were a kid? Or now, anytime.
If I had not had the experience of like really believing I had all these personal failures, I don't know who I would be today, because I like a lot of what I am is driven by that anxiety. So I would just be a totally different person. I like who I am now though, so I would hate to change anything, like I would not go back and change the way anything is. I'm pleased with the outcome, but it definitely would be a different experience with who I am in the world. It's really hard to undo the trauma of like failing for so long and thinking that it's your fault, and it kind of defines everything now. So that would be something that I would do a little bit differently, is just generally believe in it, and reference that instead of thinking it was me personally.
I imagine the more you are educated on the science behind it, it probably helps take away that power of believing it was your fault.
Definitely.
So I know that you've mentioned that to me before, that like your brain is a physical organ. And that's very different than like, hey, I failed or I am a failure.
Very different. And ADHD is a memory disorder, and it's like parts of your brain that are not working the way that other people's brains works. And I hate to say like they're not working correctly, because brains work. And it's things like how you're talking about multitasking. The reason that you can't multitask when you're ADHD is because you can't remember what you're multitasking. Like when it's not right in front of you, it is very difficult to bring that back up. And it even goes into like relationships with people. Unfortunately, like some of my best friends, I don't really talk to all that often. Like I don't talk to as much as I should, because they're not right in front of me. Like the thing that's not right in front of me, like if it's not on my to-do list for today, or if it's not in this room, it does not exist to my brain, because my brain is so focused on what it's doing right then. Literally everything else is shut aside. So when there was all these tasks floating around, it's like I don't have the ability to remember which one is I'm supposed to focus on, much less remember all these things. So it gets really overwhelming, and that's when you start getting those feelings of frustration and overwhelm. But it comes down to just like memory in general. And when I learned that, and when I like understood that it is like a literal organ, just like your heart is an organ, just like everything in your body, that was kind of revolutionary for me to be like, oh wait, because like we are our brains in a way, like I feel like I am that part of my body up there. So it's just hard to understand that that is a physical thing, and it has physical limitations and reactions and ways that it's unique. That was quite shocking to me to realize that.
I really like your description. And before we leave, I'd love to know if there's anything that you would say to any other adults specifically that are out there with ADHD.
I would say that if you have any thought that maybe like in the back of your brain, like do you feel like you could be better, or do you feel like you wish you had done this, or you wish you had not done that? If you have those feelings that are kind of a theme of your life, it's worth it to investigate. I mean, it can't hurt you to investigate it at all. That's the thing about medical professionals, is that they're professionals. And if that's not your route, that's not your route, and they're going to let you know. Understand like access to healthcare is a privilege. But if you have access to healthcare and have the ability to get it checked out, like, I mean, I'm like 15 or 16 years into this journey of like believing what this is. You don't have to believe it at the very beginning to just go talk about it and just discuss it and sit down with a professional and see what's going on, because there's a lot of things that it causes that aren't just ADHD itself, like anxiety, and it affects your relationships with people that you love, and it affects your day to day. So I think it's you are worth enough to go have that investigated. Like you're worth it. And it doesn't mean that you're flawed. It doesn't mean that something's wrong. It just means that there's like some explanations. There's some explanations available, and they can help.
Thank you so much for that encouragement. I think we all need that, and it's an amazing way that we can support others with that similar message. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Mental Note Podcast. I hope Landon's insights have inspired you to think differently about the challenges you face and the unique strengths that lie within them. His journey from feeling like he was failing at everything to embracing his ADHD as a source of creativity is a testament to the power of self-awareness, perseverance, and finding the right support. Remember, success isn't about fitting into a mold. It's about finding your own path and thriving in it. Mental Note is brought to you by Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center. If you'd like to talk to a trained therapist about treatment, please call them at 877-850-7199. If you need a free support group, check out pathlightbh.com/support-groups and eatingrecovery.com/support-groups. If you like our show, sign up for our e-newsletter and learn more about the people we interview at mentalnotepodcast.com. We'd also love it if you left us a review on iTunes. It helps others find our podcast. Mental Note is produced and hosted by me, Ellie Pike, edited by Carrie Daniels, and directed by Sam Pike. Till next time.